had just arrived at the hotel on a work trip when I opened the camera app, the one I had just installed to monitor the colorful parrots that had recently started appearing on the maple tree in front of the garage. But instead of seeing chirping parrots, I accidentally caught my husband bringing a seductive woman home. I decided to come back early without telling him. The next morning, I waited in the garage. When the automatic door opened, it took exactly 1 second for his face to go pale the moment he saw me. He even dropped the condoms in his hand. The woman asked, "Did you hire an hourly maid?" What I said next made their legs go weak. They couldn't even stand. But before I tell you what I said that shocked them so much, please hit the like button and comment below with the city you're living in. I'll tell you right now. My name is Athena, 36 years old, and I'm the nurse manager of the cardiology department at Brigham Hospital. My husband Michael and I have lived for nearly 8 years in a 3-bedroom house on the north side of Chicago, ever since he opened his own wedding photography studio. Lately, a few colorful parrots have been appearing each morning on the maple tree in front of our garage. Their chirping delighted me, so I decided to install a small camera in front of the garage, barely visible unless you look closely, just to capture a few clips for my barren Instagram account. That year, I was honored to be selected by the hospital leadership to attend the NTA conference, the largest nursing event of the year, held in mid-May in New Orleans. The 4-day trip was both for professional development and a break, after 2 full quarters without a single day off. Around 1 p.m. that day, during a break between sessions on the first day, I sat alone in my hotel room and absent-mindedly opened the camera app, just to see if the parrots had shown up in the trees today, but all I saw were strangely still branches. Disappointed, I was about to close the app when I saw the garage door at home open, at a time when Michael usually wasn't home. His car appeared, driving into the frame, parking precisely as always, and then a young woman stepped out with him, holding his arm. The way they moved didn't resemble 2 people who had just happened to meet, but rather those already deeply familiar with the space, walking naturally, without hesitation, without caution. They entered the house through the garage door, as if it was theirs. I sat frozen on the hotel room sofa, phone in hand, but unable to feel its weight anymore. I rewound the footage, and then again, not because I couldn't see clearly, but because my brain refused to accept what my eyes had just seen. I didn't cry right away, nor did I scream. There was only a strange emptiness in my chest, like the moment a doctor tells the patient's family, "We did everything we could." At that point, I didn't yet know who the woman was, didn't know how far this story would go. I only knew that the camera I had installed to watch birds had unintentionally opened a door, one I might have been living inside for years without ever realizing. At that very moment, I knew I needed to call someone, and that person could only be Nicole, my best friend of more than 10 years. I called Nicole, the one who had been by my side through endless night shifts, through the days I collapsed from exhaustion in the hospital break room, and through the phases when I believed my marriage was the one place I could let my guard down. When Nicole picked up, I said immediately, "Nicole, I just saw my husband bring another woman into our house. I don't know what to do." After saying that, I went silent, waiting for her advice like I always did, but the line stayed quiet for a long time. So long I thought the call had dropped, until Nicole finally spoke, her voice low and trembling. "Athena, I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner." I gripped the phone tightly and asked softly, "Told me what, Nicole?" She took a deep breath, like she was about to enter a dark room she didn't want to open. 3 months ago, Michael brought a woman into the hotel I manage, she said. And when I asked, "Are you sure?" Nicole replied immediately, without hesitation, "I'm sure. I saw him with my own eyes." She went on to say the woman was dressed provocatively that day, that when Nicole called Michael's name right in the lobby, he was so startled he dropped the water bottle in his hand. The sound of it hitting the tiled floor was so loud it made a few nearby guests turn their heads. In that moment, Michael pulled Nicole aside, lowered his voice and begged her, said it was just physical, not emotional, said that we had been fighting, said that if Nicole told me I would never forgive him and our family would fall apart, swore it was a one-time thing and would never happen again. And when I asked, my voice dry and cracked, "And you believed him?" Nicole was silent for a few seconds before answering, "I did. Not because I was naive, but because I thought it would hurt less if you never found out." Then she took a deep breath, as if she had reached the point of no return, and said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Athena! The hotel's security cameras recorded everything." I opened my eyes wide and asked, "Everything? Like what?" And Nicole answered, her voice much softer. "From the moment he walked in with that woman, until they left, clothes disheveled." She added that the footage was still stored, and if I wanted, she could send it to me immediately. At that moment, I couldn't stay calm anymore. I screamed inside that sealed hotel room. "Why? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The question burst out like a painful reflex. But in that very moment, as Nicole kept apologizing over and over on the other end, I suddenly realized something that tightened my chest, that the question wasn't entirely for her. It was for myself. For every time I had seen the clear signs and chosen to look away, for the nights I convinced myself it was just work stress, that I was being too sensitive. And that realization made me understand that the pain wasn't just from Michael's betrayal, but also from being betrayed once more, by my best friend's silence, and by my own ignorance that had lasted far too long. Fragments of memory that once seemed harmless began to resurface, one by one, slowly, precisely, like a doctor tracing back through medical records to find the moment a body began drifting off its normal course. Since the beginning of that year, Michael had been telling me, more often, that he had weekend wedding shoots. At first, just once or twice a month, then gradually, almost every weekend. And every time, he explained it so smoothly, so rationally, that clients were only available on Saturdays, that the studio was growing and he couldn't turn down work. And I nodded, without suspicion, because I believed that a man who made a living capturing others' happiest moments wouldn't so easily betray his own marriage. I also clearly remember how he began working out more, not just to stay fit, but pushing his body into a new kind of discipline. His gym clothes were always neat, the familiar scent of sweat replaced by sporty cologne. What disturbed me most, though I couldn't name it then, was how he would go straight into the bathroom every time he got home, locking the door and running the shower for a long time, as if trying to wash something off before facing me. When I asked, he just smiled and said shooting outdoors all day was exhausting and dirty. I blamed myself for being overly sensitive, too used to strange behaviors in the hospital. Then there were the evenings he sat on the sofa, phone held low, lips curling slightly, at messages he said were from the studio group, discussions about editing, lighting, picky clients. And I saw that smile. I knew it was different from the one he gave me after my long shifts, but I still chose to believe. I chose to believe because I didn't want to become the kind of wife who checks her husband's phone, didn't want to turn our home into an emergency room permanently on red alert. I had seen all those signs, seen them with the eyes of someone trained to read heart rhythms, to detect arrhythmias in just seconds. But ironically, when it came to my own marriage, I chose to explain everything in the safest, most rational way possible. Because trusting someone is far easier than admitting that, right inside the home I considered my refuge, a hidden truth had been growing, like a disease long missed by diagnosis. My emotions plunged to rock bottom, literally, to the point where I couldn't stand to sit another minute in a crowded conference room. Presentations on nursing management and departmental leadership suddenly felt distant and meaningless. I was sitting on the wooden hotel chair, my mind thick and dense, heart racing but hollow, and the first thing I thought of wasn't calling Michael or crying, but that if I didn't do something immediately, my head would actually explode. I meant that literally, as someone far too familiar with the ways human bodies collapse when pushed beyond their limits. I got up, dragged my feet to the bed, opened my laptop, searched for an online therapist available that very day, and booked a session for that night, as if prescribing emergency treatment for myself. Because I knew if I let emotions take control, I would end up doing something I'd regret. At exactly 8 p.m., the screen lit up. Eleanor appeared. A woman in her 50s, with a low voice and a calm gaze that made me feel strangely safe. I told her everything, from the garage camera, the hotel footage, to the call with Nicole, leaving nothing out, the way I present complex cases during department rounds. When I stopped, Eleanor didn't immediately comfort me. She simply said, slowly and clearly, that there were two things I needed to do if I wanted to protect myself. First, I had to gather more evidence, because truth only matters if it holds up legally and to my own conscience, and if possible, to catch him in the act. Not for revenge, but so I wouldn't later be pulled back by denial, distortion, or gaslighting. The second thing, Eleanor looked at me through the screen and asked a question that seemed simple but left me silent. Did I blame Nicole? Did I see her silence as part of the betrayal? For a few seconds, I wanted to say yes, because being kept in the dark has its own kind of pain. But then I slowly placed myself in Nicole's shoes and told Eleanor I forgave her, not because I took the truth lightly, but because if I were Nicole, if I were the first to discover my best friend's husband was cheating, and if that man pulled me aside, lowered his voice, begged, said it was the first time, that he would stop, that he feared losing his wife and family, then I might have chosen silence too. Not to protect betrayal, but to shield my friend from a shock I thought was still avoidable. And in that realization, I understood Nicole hadn't betrayed me. She had made a wrong choice in a situation where no choice was ever completely right, and the only true betrayer in this story, from beginning to end, had never been Nicole. What I needed now wasn't to find someone else to blame, but to stay clear-headed, steady, and not drown in the emotional storm rising by the minute. After the call with Eleanor, I felt slightly better, just enough to remain grounded and not be consumed by emotion. I returned to the garage video once more, not to find answers this time, but to confirm what I already knew. I zoomed in frame by frame, pausing at the moment the woman stepped out of the car, garage light illuminating her shoulder and arm. And in that instant, a small but strikingly familiar detail hit me. A Dior saddlebag, its signature curve, smooth leather, short strap, the kind I had seen more than once. Because I had stood several times inside the Dior store on Michigan Avenue, and the memory snapped into place. I remembered her. The young saleswoman at the fragrance counter, the one who helped me choose a birthday gift for Michael. And I clearly remembered the moment she slipped up, saying something I had once dismissed as professional intuition. Your husband likes Dior Homme Intense because of the iris. Powdery, sweet, she said. Then quickly laughed awkwardly, explaining that Michael was a regular, very particular about scents, and had even asked for her Facebook to get more tailored advice on perfumes and gifts. She had said softly that she guessed I was Michael's wife because I appeared in a few photos on his Facebook album. As those fragments reassembled in my mind, I finally realized the woman in the garage video wasn't some stranger who had wandered into my marriage. It was Sydney. She knew who I was. She had stood face to face with me. She had smiled at me. And yet she was still composed enough to walk into my home through the garage, as if every boundary had been erased long ago. When the name Sydney appeared clearly in my mind, like the final puzzle piece falling into place, I looked up at the clock on the hotel room wall. It was almost 10:30 p.m., just as my phone vibrated with a message from Michael. His tone was so familiar that if it had been a few days earlier, I might have smiled. He asked how the conference was going, whether the food in New Orleans suited my taste, whether I was tired, and I realized he was playing his role perfectly as a caring husband, while for the first time in my life, I chose to play mine differently. I replied that everything was great, the conference was informative, the food better than I expected, and I didn't confront him, didn't hint, didn't ask anything in return, because I knew that in this moment, My calm silence was the very thing that would lull him most into a false sense of security. After sending that message, I began doing very specific, dry tasks, as if handling a patient file that required clear, documented evidence. I backed up the garage video in multiple places, not just on my phone, but to a hard drive and a separate cloud account. I messaged Nicole for the hotel security footage, and when the recording arrived, I didn't watch it immediately. Just checked the timestamp, the angle, confirmed that it captured everything from the moment Michael entered until he left. Then I archived all my recent text messages with Michael, cross-referenced them with his so-called work trips, marked the dates that lined up too suspiciously, and finally reviewed the credit card statements I had previously ignored. Expensive meals, unexplained charges from our joint account. Everything was sorted neatly, emotionlessly, because I knew that from this moment forward, I wasn't collecting evidence to convince myself anymore. I was gathering it to protect myself. Once everything was safely stored, I sent Michael another message, saying I would extend my trip, that after the conference, I planned to visit my aunt in Violet, Louisiana. The same aunt he'd met at our wedding and had never once questioned. His response came quickly, quicker than his replies in recent days, and his tone was noticeably sweeter. He reminded me to buy a scarf as a gift for my aunt, told me not to overwork myself, said he missed me, said the house felt empty without me. And I read every word with a cold calmness, because I understood exactly what was happening in his mind. He believed he was safe. He thought the script he'd written was still running smoothly, that his wife, far away, still trusted him and suspected nothing. And it was precisely in that mistaken sense of security that he would continue to repeat his patterns, continue slipping up, continue leaving traces. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. Because this psychological trap didn't need rope or locked doors. It only needed one thing: the overconfidence of a man who thought he had hidden everything well enough. As I reread Michael's sweet final message, I knew I had everything I needed to move on to the next step. I opened the airline app and rescheduled my flight 2 days earlier, without hesitation, without notifying anyone, because I knew that if I gave myself more time to think, I'd start finding reasons to delay, to rationalize, to stand outside the truth one more time. My flight landed in Chicago in the morning, the familiar city unfolding through the airplane window under soft gray clouds, and I left the airport like someone returning home from a long shift. No call to my husband, no messages, no clues that my plans had changed. When I reached my neighborhood, the first thing I did was check the garage camera to make sure Michael had driven out and the house was empty. Then I pulled my suitcase from the car trunk, walked around the back, and stashed it neatly in the shed, because I didn't want any trace inside the house that I had come home early. I didn't want a suitcase in the living room to shatter the perfectly intact illusion Michael still trusted without question. I locked the shed, washed my hands, changed shoes, every movement slow and deliberate, as if preserving the state of a house untouched. When the clock neared 1 p.m., I turned off all the garage lights, closed the side door behind me, and stood in the familiar cool darkness of the concrete floor, where the smell of engine oil and old wood mingled, and I waited, not with the thrill of someone about to catch a cheater, but with the composure of someone ready for whatever outcome lay ahead, because I knew very well that within minutes, that automatic door would open, and everything I had spent so long avoiding would be forced into the light. 5 minutes later, the automatic garage door began to open, the familiar hum of the motor echoing in the cool, dim space, light from outside spilling in gradually, just enough for me to see the car pulling in close to the line, Michael's practiced motion like the hundreds of times before. Except this time, 2 people stepped out, almost simultaneously, no one leading, no one hanging back, as if they were perfectly used to appearing together in this space. When they looked up and saw me standing there, the air instantly froze, not the noisy silence of a fight, but the absolute stillness of a moment for which no one had rehearsed. Michael froze, shoulders stiff, as if every reflex had just been drained from his body, And in that brief second, a few condoms slipped from his hand and hit the cold concrete floor of the garage with faint, dry thuds, loud enough that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Sydney halted mid-step, eyes wide in shock, and then, without looking at Michael, she blurted out in a trembling, confused voice, "Is she the cleaning lady?" The question spilled out like a desperate grasp for any remaining excuse, and I didn't need to raise my voice or move forward. I just stood there and replied, very slowly, very clearly, "I'm the woman he got down on one knee and proposed to 8 years ago, and I know exactly who you are." Every word landed with measured weight in the empty garage, enough to drain the color from Michael's face, enough for me to know that in this moment, every lie he had ever constructed had nowhere left to stand. Even before my words had fully settled in the air, Sydney snapped out of her brief paralysis, spinning around and running for the garage exit in a panic. Her steps were so frantic that her high heel got caught in a crack in the floor, sending her crashing forward. The sound of her fall rang harsh and dry through the empty space, and in that instant, I saw pure fear on her face. None of the confidence or pride of the woman who once walked into my house through the garage. Sydney stumbled to her feet, yanked off her remaining shoe, and flung it behind her, like it was the last thing holding her back, then lifted her dress and ran. So chaotic and pitiful that even I was surprised to feel no anger anymore, only a cold emptiness. During all of this, Michael remained frozen. He didn't step forward to help her, didn't call her name, didn't try to explain. He just stood there, like someone petrified at the scene of his own crime, and that silence told me more than any confession ever could. When the sound of Sydney's footsteps finally disappeared beyond the entrance, I turned to Michael, still standing in the garage, like he hadn't yet grasped what had just happened. This time, I didn't need to hold back my voice, and I didn't need to raise it either. I spoke calmly, in short, clear sentences. "You have 30 minutes to gather your things and get out." Not as a threat, but as a decision long made. When he tried to speak, I cut him off and reminded him of something he knew all too well, that this house was under my name, an inheritance from my grandfather. It wasn't marital property, not something to be bargained for or negotiated in this moment. I looked him in the eye and continued, without raising my tone, but leaving no room for misinterpretation. "If you're still here after 30 minutes, I'll call 911. That was when I saw real panic appear on Michael's face, not because he was losing me, but because he finally understood that this time, everything was beyond the reach of apologies and familiar promises. He was no longer the one in control of this story. And as he lowered his head and walked toward the stairs, I stayed where I was. Didn't follow, didn't look back, because I knew this moment wasn't the end of a fight. It was the first boundary I had ever drawn to protect myself. When the bedroom door closed behind Michael, I thought the hardest part was over, that everything from here on could be handled quietly, with paperwork and distance. But at 10 p.m. that night, as the house settled into silence, and I sat alone in the living room under the only lit lamp, my phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend. Attached was a short audio file and a cautious line. "I think you should hear this." When I played it, the loud background of a Chicago bar spilled out, glasses clinking, laughter ringing, and Michael's voice came through, clear and unfiltered. He was saying I was the one who cheated, that he had been the betrayed party, that he had taken the initiative to cut me out of his life before things got too far. And I sat there, listening to every word, every syllable, feeling like someone was deliberately rewriting the entire story behind my back, not to protect themselves, but to preserve their image in the eyes of others. I stopped the recording before it ended, not because I couldn't bear it, but because I had heard enough to understand that if I chose to divorce him in silence, that silence wouldn't be used for healing. It would be twisted into a vacuum where more lies could fester. And in that moment, I knew I had no other choice, that this divorce could no longer happen quietly. Not because I craved noise, but because I refused to let the man who betrayed me continue to define me with a story that had no truth in it. An hour later, while the sting of that recording still hadn't faded from my chest, the doorbell rang, long and urgent, as if the person outside feared I wouldn't hear it. I looked at the clock. 11:07 p.m., the very hour Michael used to insist I be asleep to rest for my early shifts. I got up and walked to the door without turning on any extra lights, as if darkness helped me see more clearly than light ever could. When I opened it, Michael stood there, shirt wrinkled, eyes red, shoulders trembling, looking nothing like the man who just hours earlier had bragged in a bar about throwing his wife out of his life. "Athena, please, just hear me out," he blurted before I even had a chance to move aside. His voice cracked on the word please. I stood still, silent. Michael stepped one foot onto the porch, voice faltering. "I was wrong. I'm really sorry. I don't know how I let it get this far. I panicked. I lost control. I don't want to lose you. Please don't leave me. Just give me one more chance. Please." I watched him for a long time, long enough to see that flicker of hope light up in his eyes. That moment, he truly believed that saying sorry, looking sorry, would magically bring everything back. And I decided to act. I took a long breath, then nodded gently, voice soft like the early days of our marriage. "I need time, but okay, let's try again." I saw his shoulders drop in relief. He even reached out to hug me, but I stepped back just slightly, enough to keep distance without triggering suspicion. He didn't know, and never would suspect, that the moment I said okay, there was only one date burning bright in my mind like a flashing ER alarm. The 8-year anniversary of his wedding photography studio. The annual event he so proudly hosted, attended by clients, staff, friends, and most importantly, his primary investor. I watched Michael step off the porch, turn his back, utterly convinced I had just forgiven him. But me, I was simply preparing for the one moment where truth would have nowhere left to hide. 7 days later, on Friday evening, the 8th anniversary of Michael's studio, I arrived at the hotel where he was hosting his annual gala, the kind of event he always proudly called Client and Investor Appreciation Night. The space was bathed in warm golden light. Large wedding portraits framed the room. Soft jazz played from ceiling speakers. The studio staff were busy entertaining guests. Past clients toasted with champagne, and the main investor, Mr. Kramer, was chatting cheerfully with business partners. Everyone believed this was a night to celebrate achievement. Only I knew it would be the night everything ended. When the MC introduced Michael for his speech, he took the mic with his usual confident smile, talking about building a brand, about effort, teamwork, and, as I predicted, he turned to invite me on stage. "And here," he said, eyes glistening like nothing had ever gone wrong between us, "is the woman behind all my success, my wife, Athena. She has a special gift for me tonight." I stepped onto the stage to scattered applause. I could feel Michael's breath beside me, steeped in the confidence of someone who thinks he's escaped. I took the mic and smiled gently. "That's right. Tonight, I have a gift for you." The room quieted. A few heads turned toward me. I gestured to the tech in the back, and the screen came alive. First, the garage video. The moment the door opened, Sydney stepped out. The condoms fell from Michael's hand, his face drained of color. Then, Sydney falling at the garage entrance, fleeing barefoot in panic. The room gasped almost in unison. Then came the hotel footage. At check-in, tidy clothes and neat hair. At checkout, disheveled clothing, hair in disarray. The images left no room for interpretation. Michael had cheated. Then the receipts: 4-star hotels, fine dinners, Cartier jewelry, a Dior saddlebag, and finally, a transaction summary showing payments made directly from the studio account. I read aloud the note on the screen. Payment method, studio account, business expenses. A ripple of whispers spread fast. Some guests exchanged awkward glances. A young employee covered her mouth in shock. Mr. Kramer stood abruptly as the third receipt appeared. Without waiting for the footage to end, he turned to Michael, voice cold as steel. "We'll be speaking with our legal team. As of this moment, our investment is withdrawn, and I will be demanding full reimbursement of all misused funds." The two people beside him immediately began gathering documents, exiting the event in the most public humiliation a businessman could endure. And Michael, he stood paralyzed on stage, face pale, hands shaking so badly he couldn't even hold the microphone. Everything he had tried to hide, every lie he had carefully constructed, had just been ripped apart in front of his entire world. No more escape, no one left to blame, nothing left to defend. I looked at him one last time, set the mic down, and stepped off the stage, lighter than any step I had taken throughout this entire marriage. And the next morning, before the sun had fully risen beyond the maple trees in the front yard, I woke up with a strange feeling. Not relief, not satisfaction, just an odd, airy emptiness of someone who had finally set down a weight they had carried far too long. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began filling out the divorce paperwork. No trembling hands, no hesitation, just the final steps of a journey whose ending I had already foreseen. I attached all the evidence, the garage video, the hotel footage, the receipts paid through the studio account, the messages, the so-called work schedule, and the audio file from the bar. A complete dossier, clear as a medical conclusion: infidelity, financial fraud, prolonged deception. After emailing everything to my lawyer, I stepped outside to the front yard. The large maple stood still, just as it had on the day I first moved into this house, a gift inherited from my grandfather, where I once believed I would build a good family. I walked to the garage. I reached up and removed the camera I had once installed simply to watch a few curious parrots. No more parrots. No more surveillance. No more reason to search in the dark for the truth. I placed the camera in a box, then stood under the shade of the maple, taking a deep breath. The first breath in months that didn't carry any weight. The leaves rustled gently in the breeze, as if nodding in silent approval. And in that moment, I understood. Truth doesn't need to be shouted. But when the time comes, it has the power to bring down an entire stage built on lies. I turned and walked back inside. Not to end something, but to begin again. With myself. No longer defined by anyone else. In the weeks that followed the studio scandal, my life didn't spiral into grief or chaos the way many might expect. Instead, it returned to a rhythm I had once lost. Morning shifts in the cardiology unit, elderly patients clutching my hand as I checked their heartbeats, late-night emergencies that had me sprinting down hallways like the word exhaustion never existed. I threw myself into work, not to escape, but to remind myself that there was still a part of life far more meaningful than what had collapsed. Outside the hospital, I attended medical conferences, wrote reports, updated treatment protocols. I became again the image of a nurse manager my colleagues trusted, disciplined, composed, perceptive, as if nothing had unraveled in my personal life. Time passed quickly. 6 months from the day I filed for divorce to the official court date. The verdict was clear, fair, and unsurprising. The house remained mine, being inherited property. Joint assets were divided according to Illinois law. But what didn't need a judge's ruling had long been evident. Michael was ruined. After the scandal, investors pulled out, partners canceled contracts, clients boycotted the studio. No one wanted wedding photos taken by a man exposed for cheating at his own anniversary gala. A flood of lawsuits and penalties bankrupted the studio. Within months, Michael shut down, sold off equipment, liquidated assets, everything to repay debt. And Sydney, her life didn't fare any better. On social media, an anonymous account accused her of being a homewrecker. Though anonymous, I'm fairly sure it was Nicole. 2 weeks later, Dior terminated her to protect their brand image. Her TikTok, once with over 300,000 followers, dropped below 5,000 amid a wave of unfollows and angry comments. With no income, she couldn't keep up with condo payments. She had to sell quickly at a loss, just to cut her losses and leave. In the end, she moved back in with her parents, taking a modest job at a local farm. A job that needed no makeup, no designer bags, no curated videos to build a glamorous life. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't seek revenge. I simply stood back and watched everything collapse under the weight of its own making. Because some stages, when the lights go out, finally reveal who was truly standing strong all along. And then time passed, as it always does. Slowly through long hospital shifts, yet astonishingly fast when I looked back at how far I'd come. I continued working steadily at the hospital. 2 a.m. cardiac emergencies, elderly patients needing reassurance before surgery, departmental meetings, where I poured all my energy into improving treatment protocols. None of that effort went to waste. 1 year after the divorce hearing, during a midday emergency case I was assisting with, my phone vibrated. It was the hospital director calling. My heart dropped for a second, wondering if I'd made a mistake, broken a rule without realizing it. But when I stepped into the meeting room on the 5th floor and saw the core leadership gathered, I knew this wasn't a disciplinary meeting. The director, Genesis, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, smiled at me. She spoke slowly and clearly. "Athena, the hospital deeply appreciates your contributions over the past decade, and today, we'd like to appoint you as Chief Nursing Officer." I stood there in stunned silence, barely believing what I'd just heard. One of the highest leadership roles in nursing, a position requiring not just expertise, but vision, improvement, and strength. I realized I was smiling, even as my eyes stung. Not because of the title, but because I had come such a long way to finally stand where I belonged. In my new role, I frequently worked with department heads, and that's where love quietly found me again. He was the head of cardiology, not someone who drew attention with words or looks, but with how he worked. The way he gently held a patient's hand before surgery. The way he remembered every returning senior patient by name. The way he balanced decisiveness with compassion in high-risk situations. I didn't love him for his authority, but for his heart, the kind that treated every patient like family. We loved each other for 2 years, a mature, quiet love that didn't need proving, only presence. Until one evening after a long surgery shift, in a hallway still smelling of disinfectant, he knelt, still wearing his sterile rubber gloves, and said, "Athena, you are the steady rhythm in my chaotic life. Will you marry me?" I laughed, overwhelmed, amused that he forgot the ring in his lab coat, and it clattered to the floor. But I said yes without hesitation, without second thoughts. On our wedding day, we both knew our lives had turned a new page, one more peaceful, more kind. And during that warm, intimate reception with close colleagues, I handed him a small envelope. He opened it. Inside was a 5-week ultrasound image. His hands trembled. His lips moved, but no words came out. And his eyes, the eyes of a man who had saved so many lives, shone with emotion for the very first time. He leaned down, placed his hand on my belly, and whispered, "Our family begins today." And I knew, finally, I had arrived at the place I was always meant to be. That's my story. A journey that began with a garage camera and ended with a new family, a new career, and a life I never dared dream of. I know there may be parts of this story that anger you, upset you, or even make you question things. But I've told it with all the honesty of a woman who has faced heartbreak, risen from it, and reclaimed herself piece by piece. And if this story touched you, please hit like to give me strength, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the stories to come. Stories of betrayal, healing, and the inner power of women who endure hardship but still rise and move forward toward the future.